Nobody saw it coming. Not the analysts in Washington, not the intelligence chiefs in Tel Aviv, not the diplomats scrambling across hotel lobbies in Riyadh, Vienna, and Geneva. While the world was watching missiles fly, while cameras were rolling on explosions over Iranian skies, and while every geopolitical commentator on Earth was focused on what Israel was doing, no one was asking the more dangerous question. The question of who was winning without firing a single shot. The question of who had engineered the entire situation from the beginning, and who was now sitting back, watching their trap close with the patience of a man who's been planning this for years. That man is Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the 39-year-old who controls the world's largest oil reserves, who is building a futuristic city in the desert, who shook hands with Trump in Riyadh and smiled for the cameras, who publicly condemned Israel's attacks on Iran and privately let American forces use Saudi bases, the man who speaks softly in public and moves entire chessboards in private. And what he has done over the last 2 years, the patient, methodical, almost invisible web he has woven around Israel, is one of the most remarkable acts of strategic maneuvering in modern geopolitical history. This is not a story about missiles. This is a story about a trap. And Israel walked right into it. To understand the trap, you first have to understand what Israel wanted more than almost anything in the region: recognition, legitimacy, integration. Israel has been fighting for its survival since its founding, surrounded by neighbors who did not want it there, defined by conflict, spending an extraordinary portion of its national budget on defense, and watching its international image, once a story of resilience and democracy, become increasingly complicated with every military campaign, every settlement expansion. And every year, the Palestinian issue remained unresolved. What Israel wanted, what Netanyahu had been chasing for years as the capstone of his political legacy, was normalization with Saudi Arabia. Not just any normalization, not a quiet handshake deal. A full, formal, publicly announced normalization agreement with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam, the guardian of Mecca and Medina, the most religiously and politically significant Arab state in the world. If Saudi Arabia recognized Israel, the entire geopolitical map of the Middle East would shift. Other Arab and Muslim states would follow. The Palestinian issue would be effectively sidelined. Israel would be embedded in the region not as an occupying power fighting for survival, but as a legitimate, recognized, integrated member of a prosperous Middle Eastern order. It would be, in Netanyahu's own words on Fox News, a historic peace, the kind that would reshape the region forever. And in 2023, it was close, genuinely close. MBS was on the verge of recognizing Israel when the Gaza war broke out, putting those relations on hold. Think about what that means. The single biggest diplomatic prize in the Middle East, the normalization deal that every American president since Roosevelt had dreamed of, the deal that would have made Netanyahu a historic statesman instead of a man under legal pressure at home, was within reach. And then Hamas attacked on October 7th, 2023. And Israel's response in Gaza began. And the window closed. But here is where the story gets complicated. Because what closed that window was not just the war in Gaza. What kept that window closed, what turned it into a sealed wall, was a series of decisions and moves by MBS that, taken individually, look like pragmatic responses to difficult circumstances, but taken together reveal something far more deliberate: a strategy, a long game, played with the oil wealth of a nation and the patience of a man who knows he has time on his side. MBS has unleashed a torrent of reforms under the banner of Vision 2030 to position Saudi Arabia as a safe, stable, and attractive destination for investors and tourists. That is the foundation of everything. Vision 2030 is not just an economic plan. It is the organizing principle of Saudi Arabia's entire foreign policy. Every diplomatic decision MBS makes flows from one central question: does this help or hurt the investment environment, the stability, and the international image of Saudi Arabia? War hurts it. Chaos hurts it. Being seen as an American or Israeli puppet hurts it. Being seen as a regional peacemaker and a responsible global actor helps it enormously. And so every move MBS has made, the détente with Iran, the refusal to normalize with Israel while Gaza burned, the public condemnation of Israeli strikes, the quiet behind-the-scenes posture, all of it serves Vision 2030. All of it is rational. And all of it, whether by design or by fortunate alignment of interests, has produced a situation in which Israel is diplomatically paralyzed. Let us trace exactly how this paralysis was built, step by step. Step one was the China-brokered Saudi-Iran détente of March 2023. This was a diplomatic earthquake that most Western analysts vastly underestimated. MBS does not want Israel to attack Iran, and he has tried to reduce tensions with Iran. You see this in a détente agreement signed in March 2023 that reopened embassies between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which was a really striking moment given their relationship over a long period of time. The history between Riyadh and Tehran is one of deep, bitter hostility. Iran's revolutionary government spent decades calling the Saudi royal family illegitimate puppets of the West. Saudi Arabia and Iran fought a brutal proxy war in Yemen for years. Their diplomatic relations collapsed entirely in 2016 when a Saudi mob attacked the Iranian embassy in Tehran. These were not countries that normalized relations quietly and casually. This was a seismic shift, and MBS chose to broker it through China, not through the United States. That detail matters enormously. By choosing Beijing as the mediator instead of Washington, MBS was sending a clear message to every party involved. Saudi Arabia is not America's satellite. Saudi Arabia makes its own decisions. Saudi Arabia can work with anyone it chooses. This was not disloyalty to the United States. It was strategic autonomy, displayed publicly at a moment when it would have maximum impact. And the impact on Israel was devastating, because the entire logic of the Israeli-Saudi normalization deal was built on a shared threat perception of Iran. The theory was that Israel and Saudi Arabia both feared Iran, and so a formal alliance between them was the natural outcome of that shared fear. But if Saudi Arabia is reducing tensions with Iran, normalizing embassies with Iran, conducting joint naval exercises with Iran, suddenly the premise of Israeli-Saudi normalization collapses. Israel loses its most powerful argument. MBS won't give up his relationships with Russia or China or become the tip of an American or Israeli spear against Iran. He won't sacrifice Saudi Arabia's strategic autonomy and will resist choosing sides if pressed for clean breaks. This is the core of MBS's strategic posture, stated plainly by analysts who study him closely. He will not be weaponized. He will not be turned into a tool of any other power's foreign policy. He cultivates relationships in every direction precisely so that no single power can force his hand. And that posture, maintained consistently, means that Israel can never count on Saudi Arabia as a reliable partner against Iran, which fundamentally undermines Israel's entire strategic calculation for the region. Then came October 7th, and Israel's response in Gaza, and the political earthquake that followed across the Arab world. Israel has embarked on genocide in Gaza, war in Lebanon, and attacks on the likes of Yemen, Iran, Syria, and Qatar, causing anger across the region and major headaches for Arab governments that had previously shown willingness to normalize relations with Israel. Every Israeli military action after October 7th, and there were many, made MBS's position easier, not because MBS wanted Israelis to die or Palestinians to suffer, but because each action made it more politically impossible for any Arab leader, including MBS, to be seen publicly aligning with Israel. Arab public opinion became a wall, and MBS could stand behind that wall and pursue his own interests while appearing to simply be responding to his people's legitimate outrage. Israel's operations in Gaza made normalization politically impossible, at least in the near term. Israel became a military juggernaut determined to shape the future of the Middle East. Saudi Arabia feared Iran, but it was equally unwilling to be locked into a regional order fully defined by Israel. That last sentence is the one that should be studied carefully. Saudi Arabia fears Iran, yes, but it equally fears an Israel that becomes so dominant, so militarily unchecked, so diplomatically unaccountable that it dictates the terms of the entire Middle Eastern order. MBS does not want to trade one regional hegemon for another. He wants balance. He wants a region where Saudi Arabia is the pivotal power, the indispensable broker, not a subordinate in someone else's alliance system. Saudi Arabia believes that Israel sees the war as a way to make Gulf Arab states dependent on it and lock Iran and Saudi Arabia into a longer conflict, entrenching Israel's hegemony and reducing the Gulf states to mere oil producers with little strategic relevance. Read that again. The Saudi leadership believes Israel is using the Iran conflict strategically, not just to eliminate a nuclear threat, but to lock the entire Gulf into a position of dependence and irrelevance. Whether that interpretation is accurate or not is secondary to the fact that this is how MBS and his inner circle perceive it. And perception drives policy. If Saudi Arabia believes Israel is trying to trap it, Saudi Arabia will do everything in its power to avoid being trapped, and will build traps of its own. And then came June 2025, the 12-day war between Israel, the United States, and Iran, the moment that crystallized everything. Saudi Arabia's refusal to allow its territory or airspace to be used in the June 2025 Israel-US attacks on Iran vindicated the push for détente. Riyadh publicly condemned Israeli aggressions against the brotherly Islamic Republic of Iran, a remarkable statement given past animosities between Riyadh and Tehran. Publicly condemned Israeli aggressions. Those 4 words from a Saudi government statement are extraordinary. Saudi Arabia, which for decades competed with Iran for regional supremacy, which fought Iran's proxies in Yemen at a cost of hundreds of billions of dollars, which watched Iranian-backed forces attack its oil facilities, called Iran a brotherly Islamic republic, and condemned Israel for attacking it. And Iran's foreign minister responded by personally thanking Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for his stance and praising his efforts to promote security and stability. This is the moment the trap fully closed. Because now MBS had achieved something that would have seemed impossible just 5 years ago, a position where both Iran and the Arab world see Saudi Arabia as a responsible actor, standing against Israeli aggression, while simultaneously maintaining functional relationships with the United States and pursuing the economic transformation of his kingdom. He got there without firing a single bullet. He got there without a single Saudi soldier setting foot on a battlefield. He got there by being patient, by being strategic, and by understanding that in a region full of actors who cannot resist the temptation to use military force, the power to abstain from violence is itself a form of dominance. Saudi Arabia risked nothing. The Crown Prince triangulated among the three key nations, publicly condemning Israel's attacks and quietly urging President Donald Trump to stay out of the war, though he clearly knew Iran's nuclear and regional ambitions were a threat to him. In short, MBS played a skillful defensive game and wound up a passive winner. A passive winner. Think about what that phrase captures. While Israel risked its survival by striking Iran, while Iran risked its nuclear program, while the United States risked its global credibility, Saudi Arabia sat back and won, not by doing more, by doing less, by choosing not to act in a conflict that others were desperate to drag it into. MBS realizes that Iran has this arsenal of short-range missiles that can do a tremendous amount of damage, not just to oil facilities, but also vital installations like desalination plants, electricity generation plants, and communication systems. This is the calculation that drives everything. Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure, its desalination plants that provide drinking water to millions, its power grid, all of it is within range of Iranian missiles. MBS knows this. He has known it since the 2019 attack that briefly shut down half of Saudi Arabia's oil production and made the world's energy markets tremble. He knows that Saudi Arabia, for all its billions spent on American and European military hardware, cannot fully defend itself from a determined Iranian missile barrage. And he knows that the United States, after failing to respond to the 2019 attack, cannot be fully relied upon to protect Saudi Arabia from Iranian retaliation. That experience convinced Riyadh that it could not rely on U.S. security guarantees. So MBS made a decision. If you cannot fully defend against a neighbor, reduce the reasons that neighbor would attack you. Build a détente. Open embassies. Conduct naval exercises together. Create a web of economic and diplomatic relationships that makes attacking Saudi Arabia more costly for Iran. And simultaneously, crucially, never give Iran a reason to classify Saudi Arabia as an enemy in a conflict it is already fighting. The Saudi refusal to allow its airspace to be used in the Israeli-American strikes on Iran was not just a diplomatic statement. It was a practical message to Tehran. We are not your enemy in this war. Do not make us a target. And Tehran received that message. Tehran acknowledged the Saudi stance, with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi thanking the kingdom for condemning Israeli aggression and praising Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's efforts to promote security and stability in the region. Now consider what Israel is left with after all of this. Israel went to war against Iran. It struck Iranian nuclear facilities. It achieved significant military objectives. Iran's nuclear program was set back, its air defense systems were degraded, its regional proxy network was substantially weakened. By any narrow military measure, Israel won the 12-day war. But strategically, geopolitically, what did Israel actually gain? The normalization deal with Saudi Arabia, which was Netanyahu's grand prize, the legitimization he sought, the integration into the Arab world he promised his people, is further away than ever. As Israel's occupation expands, and the rhetoric from the Israeli government regarding Greater Israel intensifies, the prospects for normalization with Saudi Arabia are effectively non-existent in the foreseeable future. And no outcome of the war with Iran will change that. Netanyahu actually believed, and said publicly on Fox News, that defeating Iran would open the door to Saudi normalization. Netanyahu said he believes that a war with Iran would pave the way for historic peace with Saudi Arabia. The Israeli Prime Minister genuinely thought that by removing the Iranian threat, Saudi Arabia would have no reason to hesitate on normalization. What he failed to understand, or chose not to acknowledge, is that MBS's hesitation was never only about Iran. It was about Gaza. It was about the Palestinian state. It was about Israeli settlements in the West Bank. It was about not wanting to be seen by the Arab world as endorsing Israeli military dominance. The prevailing assumption in Israel that a shared threat perception of Iran would lead to normalization of ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia without stabilizing Gaza and making progress on the West Bank is exaggerated. This thinking underestimates the importance of the Palestinian issue in the Arab world post-October 7th. Israel won a battle and walked into a trap. Because now MBS has additional leverage he did not have before. Saudi Arabia was almost dragged into a war it did not want. Iranian missiles struck near Saudi infrastructure. Nearly all Gulf states have been affected to varying degrees, not only in terms of security risks, but also through mounting economic repercussions. The Strait of Hormuz, The narrow waterway through which roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes was threatened with closure. The entire global economy was shaken. And Saudi Arabia can now point to all of this damage, all of this disruption to its Vision 2030 plans. All of this instability that originated from an Israeli military decision made without Saudi consultation or consent. And say to Washington, you see what happens when you let Israel act unilaterally? You see what it costs us? You see why we cannot normalize relations with a government that behaves this way? Israeli and American media portray Riyadh as unofficially aligned with their military campaign against Iran, despite repeated denials from the Saudi leadership and its calls for de-escalation. Promoting this simplified narrative aims to force Riyadh into choosing sides, increases its vulnerability to Iranian reprisals, while dealing a potentially fatal blow to its diplomatic relations with Tehran. This is a crucial insight into the information war happening alongside the military one. Israel and elements of the American media have been trying to publicly associate Saudi Arabia with their campaign, trying to create a narrative of a unified anti-Iran coalition that includes Riyadh. MBS has been fighting this narrative actively and consistently. He knows that if the world believes Saudi Arabia was a secret partner in the strikes on Iran, Saudi Arabia loses its détente with Tehran, loses its standing in the Arab world, loses its carefully cultivated image of independence, and becomes exactly what it has spent years trying to avoid becoming: Israel's satellite. And MBS is winning that information battle too, because his actions speak clearly. He publicly condemned the strikes. He refused airspace access. He maintained communication with Iranian officials throughout the conflict. Official statements have consistently emphasized a preference for diplomatic solutions and de-escalation, and vowed not to allow its airspace to be used for attacking Iran. Whatever private conversations may have happened between MBS and Trump, and there are reports of ambiguity there, the public record is unambiguous. Saudi Arabia positioned itself as a voice for peace and stability, not as a participant in a military campaign. Now, let us look at what MBS actually wants, because understanding his endgame reveals just how comprehensively Israel has been outmaneuvered. What MBS reportedly wants is a Senate-ratified defense commitment along the lines of a NATO Article 5 pledge, a formal binding American security guarantee, not just a presidential promise that can be withdrawn by the next administration, but a treaty ratified by the United States Senate that commits America to defend Saudi Arabia as it would defend a NATO ally. This is the crown jewel of Saudi foreign policy ambitions. And to get it, MBS needs to be Washington's indispensable partner, not a dependent client, not a mere oil supplier, but a genuine strategic asset that the United States cannot afford to lose. The inability to reach agreements on a start date for direct talks with Israel regarding Saudi Arabia normalization has delayed the final U.S. approval for the sale of F-35 aircraft to the kingdom, and several clauses in the defense agreement between Washington and Riyadh. And yet MBS is willing to let those F-35 sales sit on the table, unresolved, because he understands that the leverage he gains by not normalizing with Israel, by keeping normalization as a future reward rather than a current concession, is worth more than any military hardware. The moment Saudi Arabia normalizes with Israel without meaningful concessions on Palestine, MBS loses his most powerful bargaining chip. He loses the ability to make Washington come to him. He loses the position of indispensable broker and becomes, in the words of analysts he deeply fears, just another oil-producing state with little strategic relevance. Saudi officials have begun to say openly that the kingdom would normalize ties when Israel began to act like a normal country. Act like a normal country. That phrase from a former Saudi intelligence chief is both a diplomatic message and a verdict. It says, "We're not opposed to normalization in principle. We are opposed to normalizing with this government, these policies, this pattern of behavior. It puts the burden entirely on Israel to change. And since the current Israeli government has no intention of changing its approach to the West Bank, settlements, or Palestinian statehood, this condition functions as an indefinite delay, a polite, diplomatic, publicly justifiable, indefinite delay." Riyadh made clear in early contacts that it could not sign on to joining the Abraham Accords with the current Israeli government composition, meaning with the right-wing parties of Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. This concerns not only statements by the right-wing ministers against a Palestinian state or Saudi Arabia itself, but mainly their push to expand settlements. MBS is not negotiating with Netanyahu. He is not even negotiating with Israel. He is waiting for Israel to change its government, its policies, or its trajectory, knowing that the current Israeli political coalition cannot and will not make those changes. It is checkmate without a single piece being captured. And here is the deepest layer of the trap, the one that makes this entire story so astonishing. Israel's military victories, which were real and significant, have actually made the normalization deal harder to achieve, not easier. Because every time Israel strikes a new target, Hamas leaders in Qatar, nuclear facilities in Iran, positions in Syria, The outrage in the Arab world deepens. As Galip Dalay and Sanam Vakil wrote, Israeli actions have provoked such outrage across the Arab world that any form of visible alignment with Israel has become a direct threat to the legitimacy and security of regimes. MBS rules a country where public opinion about Palestine runs deep and hot. He may be an authoritarian who does not hold elections, but he is not indifferent to his population's sentiments, because those sentiments affect stability, and stability is everything for Vision 2030. Every Israeli airstrike that fills Arab social media with footage of suffering makes MBS's political cost of normalization higher. Israel's military strength is, paradoxically, becoming a diplomatic liability. To the hard power logic pursued by Israel and the United States, the Gulf states, particularly Saudi Arabia, have opposed a model of regional leadership centered on diplomatic engagement and geoeconomic influence. Given the limitations of their own military capabilities, Gulf countries have long relied on their financial leverage to secure the support of external powers and to shape political developments within their immediate neighborhood. This is the contrast that defines the current moment in Middle Eastern geopolitics. Israel has the most powerful military in the region. Saudi Arabia has the financial leverage, the religious legitimacy, the diplomatic patience, and the strategic autonomy. In the 20th century, military power was the supreme currency of geopolitics. In the 21st century, especially in a region exhausted by decades of war, financial leverage and diplomatic positioning may matter more. MBS has built a coalition, quietly, without fanfare, without the kind of dramatic summit announcements that generate headlines. Saudi Arabia signed a defense pact with Pakistan last year. That pact became the basis for a broader regional coalition, also including Egypt and Turkey, to deter and contain threats to Saudi interests from both Iran and Israel, a coordination that teed up Pakistan's mediation efforts in the current conflict. Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, Turkey, 4 significant Muslim-majority nations, representing hundreds of millions of people, billions in economic weight, nuclear capability in Pakistan's case, and NATO membership in Turkey's case. And the implicit purpose of this coalition is not just to deter Iran. It is to ensure that Saudi Arabia has options, that it is never at the mercy of any single external power, whether that power is America, Israel, or Iran. MBS has pushed Trump to consider overthrowing the Iranian regime with a ground invasion if necessary, while simultaneously maintaining Saudi Arabia's position outside the conflict. This is perhaps the most audacious part of the entire strategy. Reports suggest that MBS privately encouraged Trump to escalate against Iran, to go further, to be more aggressive, while publicly condemning the attacks and keeping Saudi Arabia out of the fight. If accurate, this represents a breathtaking calculation. Encourage your ally to do the dirty work, absorb none of the risk yourself, and then position yourself as the voice of reason, calling for de-escalation when the dust settles. Saudi Arabia burns no Saudi blood, destroys no Saudi military equipment, takes no Iranian missile strikes on its territory, but potentially benefits from a weakened Iran that can no longer threaten Saudi oil facilities or back Houthi rebels in Yemen. Whether that calculation will ultimately prove correct is still unfolding. Iran's decline has eased the kingdom's threat matrix, but Tehran's weakness has enabled other regional powers, such as Turkey and Egypt, to expand their influence and offer regional visions that sometimes compete with Riyadh's. Every action has consequences that extend beyond the intended target. A weakened Iran creates a power vacuum in the region, and Turkey, ambitious, militarily capable, increasingly assertive, is moving to fill it. MBS may have wanted Iran reduced, but not eliminated, checked, but not collapsed, because a completely destroyed Iran removes a counterweight that has actually served Saudi interests in some ways, by making Saudi Arabia's stability look more attractive by comparison. The Saudis see the Iranians as neighbors. Chaos in Iran would spill over into Saudi Arabia, whereas Israel is 1,000 kilometers away from Iran and doesn't care what happens there. MBS will be telling Trump, we don't want chaos in Iran. Geography is destiny. Iran and Saudi Arabia share the Persian Gulf. They share history, trade routes, and the complex bonds of proximity. A collapsed Iranian state, not just a weakened government, but a genuinely collapsed state, with civil war and failed governance, would send refugees, weapons, and instability flowing in every direction. Saudi Arabia would feel that chaos directly. Israel, 1,000 kilometers away, would not. And so MBS's opposition to the war with Iran is not just about the détente, not just about Vision 2030, not just about avoiding missile strikes. It is about the fundamental geographic reality that Saudi Arabia cannot afford to live next to a failed state. And yet, here we are. The war happened. Iran was struck. The nuclear facilities were damaged. The Middle East was shaken. And MBS emerged from all of it in a stronger position than he entered it. Saudi Arabia's recent moves to upgrade relations with Pakistan and possibly Turkey represent either a shift toward maximum flexibility or the beginnings of a regional coalition to counterbalance Israel and the UAE. The direction of Saudi Arabia's diplomacy, traced across these months and years, points consistently toward one goal: a region where Saudi Arabia is the essential power, not the most militarily dominant, not the most aggressive, the most necessary, the country without which no lasting deal can be made, no lasting peace can be secured, no regional order can be sustained. Israel is militarily the strongest country in the Middle East. It proved that again in June 2025 against Iran. But military strength alone does not buy you the normalization, the legitimacy, the integration you need to exist not just as a fortress, but as a genuinely accepted member of the region. And for that, for the thing Israel needs most, it must deal with MBS, on MBS's terms, in MBS's time, when MBS decides it serves his interests to offer it. That is the trap, not a physical trap, not a military encirclement, a strategic trap, a diplomatic trap, a trap built from patience and positioning, and the careful cultivation of leverage over years. Israel can bomb entire countries. It cannot bomb its way to diplomatic recognition. It cannot strike the Arab world's need for Palestinian justice into submission. It cannot destroy the Saudi calculation that normalization, extended as a future possibility rather than a present concession, is worth infinitely more than normalization given away today. To secure what MBS really wants, a stable region focused on prosperity, not just Palestinian-Israeli grievances, he will need to be a visible leader in the region, openly pressing his goals, not cynically playing all parties in private. That assessment, from a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who has spent decades covering Saudi Arabia, points to the one vulnerability in MBS's strategy. He has played the game brilliantly in the shadows. The world knows Saudi Arabia's official positions. Fewer people understand the depth of the strategic calculation behind them. And eventually, to achieve the kind of regional leadership he seeks, MBS will have to step into the light. He will have to publicly champion the Palestinian cause, not just as a condition for normalization, but as a genuine political project. He will have to spend Saudi prestige, not just Saudi money, on building the Middle East, he envisions. But that moment has not arrived yet. For now, MBS is content to watch Israel entangle itself deeper in military campaigns that win battles and lose diplomatic ground, to watch Iran lick its wounds and deepen its strategic dependence on Saudi restraint, to watch Trump pull his ally toward confrontation while simultaneously wanting the Saudi investment dollars that MBS controls, and to sit, calm and patient, at the center of a web he has spent years constructing, waiting for the moment when every party in the Middle East has no choice but to come to Riyadh. Not because MBS fired a single bullet, but because he never had to. That is how you paralyze a country without going to war with it. That is how you win by refusing to play the game everyone expects you to play. That is MBS's ultimate trap. And the most remarkable thing about it is that it is still springing.